I think as young adults, we just get really tense by the thought of finances, or like the idea of money or budgeting. It causes us to like tense up, and it makes us so stressed. And I was just doing some research on this, and I found some stats. One said that 57% of millennials are stressed about their finances, with 48% saying that financial matters is the top cause of their stress. And yeah, I just think of, as young adults, finances are hard. We're in a tough place where we have a lot of them. There's a lot of things that we can be spending our money on, or maybe need to spend our money on. There's school, there's cars, there's houses, there's just hanging out with friends, going out, buying clothes, all these things that we're setting up our lives, yet we don't really make a ton of money, which I think just causes a lot of the stress. But what if we were actually becoming a generation that we were setting ourselves up for success when it came to our money? Because I think that's what God wants for our lives. I think He has given us these resources, He's given us these jobs, He's given us these dreams, and He's given us the responsibility to take care of it. But so often we don't. So often I think that we get caught up in whatever we're doing right now, or however we're living. When I was doing some research, there's this thing, they call it just FOMO debt. And the stat was that 50% of young adults in Canada have gone into debt just so that they can keep up with their friends. So that's buying clothes, or going out to eat, or traveling. We feel like we have to live up to this standard, and so we spend more money. We get into credit card debt. The average Canadian is $2,600 in credit card debt, and they're $20,000 in consumer debt, not including mortgages. So like, we are a generation that has a lot of debt. But how do we get out of that? How do we set ourselves up for success? How do we foster this life of generosity and using our money for what God is calling us to? And so to discuss some of these thoughts, I figured that we could go to a professional who maybe actually has some experience and expertise in this area. Well, hey, Brendan, thank you so much for joining us on the Ascent Conversations. Today we're going to be talking about money, which is just everyone's favorite topic.
Yeah.
It's like money and sex. Those are the two things people love talking about, right?
Love talking about.
Yeah, our favorite topic.
The real vulnerable things.
Yes.
People like getting straight to those.
But do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Brendan Peters. I am an independent insurance and investment broker here in Winnipeg. I'm also a money coach. So what I do is I help people with the three priorities when it comes to organizing or setting up healthy finances, which is protecting yourself with insurances, organizing your money well, and then preparing for the future. So those are the three things that I do.
And how did you get into that? Because you used to work at Riverwood in our community ministries.
Yeah.
And then how did you transfer from working with a nonprofit to working with finances and being a money coach?
Oh, that is a long story, but I'll try to keep it short. So first of all, I grew up in a household where we dealt with sickness and we dealt with death. And we didn't quite have the insurances that we should have had. And so it ended up putting us in a real financial difficulty, which was really hard to get through. And so I just saw the impact of not being financially prepared right from when I was young. And then when I was 21, I got a job. I came back from doing ministry overseas, and I got a job, and I was making $35 grand a year, and I was going into debt, and I was working alongside a guy who was in his 30s with kids, had a house, was going on vacation, had no debt, and I realized, organizing your money is an issue, and it's something that people need to be able to do well, or else they end up like me, 21, single, with no expenses, going into debt. And I also saw, when I was working through ministry, working at Riverwood, I worked at Salome Mission too. I saw people who left their jobs because they felt like it wasn't enough to provide for their families. And having seen and worked with this guy who was doing it well and still being able to do ministry, making similar money to what I was making, made me realize that if I can help people actually organize and figure out their money stuff, then maybe they can continue to do the things that they love and not leave those the things that they're passionate about, leave the work that they're passionate about, because they have to get a job that pays better to provide for their family.
Right.
So it's kind of all three of those things came together.
Wow.
And a few years back, I was moving back from BC, coming back to Winnipeg, and I said, I want to do this. So I got into it.
Wow, that's so good. And did you do like schooling or training for
Yeah,
it, or
yeah.
just kind of self-taught?
No, you have to get licensed.
Okay.
So I went to school
Good.
for it. I spent 40 hours a week for a whole bunch of months studying and getting my license so I could help people with it.
So you are a pro.
I am. I try to be. And my father's also in the industry, so he's a great mentor. So I've got a lot of experience to work from. So.
That's awesome. Like you know what as young adults we're going through with like the struggle of money and debt and like the tension there, but then you've also like you've come to the other side in a place where like you're able to help other people now. So I'm fully confident you'll be able to help us today.
I'll try my best. I'm not there yet, but we're working.
It's a journey, right?
Yeah, exactly. Money is always a journey. You just keep getting better at it.
Yeah. What would you say is one of the biggest challenges for young adults when it comes to finances?
Oh, I could probably sum it up into 3.
Okay.
And me being 21, back to when I was not very good with money, I think my situation is a prime example. I came home, I started making money, and I had no idea what to do with it. I had no education. I had no understanding of how to organize money. And I think that's kind of the first problem, is that we don't really get taught how to organize our money well. I think one thing that, if we grow up in the church, one thing we get taught is we should tithe, but we don't really get taught how to organize the rest of it.
Right.
And it's not taught in schools, and it should be taught at home, but often it isn't, because I think a lot of people feel kind of insecure about how they're handling their money.
Yeah.
So the first is just good education, open conversation. It's not really there. And so you start making money as a young adult, and you're like, what do I do with this? How do I do this wisely?
Right.
Which often leads to falling into the debt cycle. And that is one of the biggest challenges. And that comes largely in part to also our just consumer culture.
Right.
So I'd kind of sum it up into those 3. So I'm 21, making money. I can go out and buy things, and I'm getting sold via media and everything else. I'm getting sold ads on buying clothes and eating out and being with friends, and I'm soaking it in, and I'm living my life. It's
freedom for the first time.
And it feels like freedom for the first time,
Yeah.
but what it causes is the debt cycle, because people end up overspending.
Right.
And then you end up in debt, and debt is really hard to get out of. And so it kind of just builds on one another, and all 3 of those things combined usually become a major challenge to all of a sudden set yourself right or get yourself in a good financial position. Yeah.
So is debt always a bad thing? So like as young adults, we're just starting off on life. Like, you know, we might have a job, but we're also going to school, and we might be, you know, paying rent, moving out of our parents' house. We need to buy a car, and there's all these like large expenses to kind of begin our lives, people would say.
Yeah.
So is going into debt for those things, is that a bad thing? Or what would you say to that?
Generally speaking, I think that it is best to avoid debt.
Okay.
There are always debts that are okay. There are debts that are understandable. So housing debt, it brings an asset. I understand going to school as well, because that's going to bring a job where you will earn more. The problem is that most people end up in what's called consumer debt or credit card debt, where it's things that actually don't increase your value. It's just stuff that you have to pay off or decreases in value.
Okay.
So things like a car, it never increases in value. It only ends up being a cost to you. Using your credit card to buy clothes or go out for food or just natural overspending, all that debt, that's just stuff that you have to pay back that doesn't bring any extra value or an asset to you, I guess would be another word to say it. And so in general, it's the consumer and the credit card debt that are the real problems. The rest, it really depends on your situation. Okay. But yeah, I'd really try to avoid the consumer and the credit card debt.
How do you avoid that when we do live in a consumer culture where it's like you see an ad on Instagram or on Facebook or pretty much any website you go on, there's an ad, and like it's so tailored to you and what you search, and so it's like so easy to just go give into that, right?
Yeah.
And to just like buy one thing after another, or just think that it's going to add so much to your life.
how do you even change the mentality around that or like avoid it?
Oh. So first thing, I'm just going to talk about the negative side effect of debt first, so
Sure.
because maybe
Let's hear it.
that'll help.
Yeah.
And then we can talk about what you can do to avoid it. But ultimately, what happens when you get into debt? So let's say you get into debt. Let's say you overspend $100 one month. You now have to, if you're naturally overspending $100 a month on whatever it is, clothing, eating out, you now have to, first of all, pay that $100 back. Then you have to pay interest on it. And then you also have to stop overspending. So you have 3 extra problems the moment you get into debt. You have to learn how to not spend more than you earn. You have to pay back what you have overspent, and then you have to pay interest. So it's kind of, everything is against you sort of when you get into debt and you start trying to pay it back. And you end up spending so much more money. So just as an example, if you're like $10,000 in debt and you want to pay that off over 10 years and it's on a credit card, you're looking at like over $30,000 that you're going to end up having to pay back.
Wow.
When you take into consideration the interest that you're going to pay on it, plus paying it back, plus not overspending anymore. And so it's a big deal and it's really hard. And that's why people, once they get into the debt cycle or start and try to get out of debt, it's like, why is this so hard? Why does this take forever? It makes people feel like they can't get ahead. It's because you can't get ahead. It's so much harder to get out of debt than it is to just save for that.
And that's something
purchase.
you don't even like think of it when you're on Amazon and you're like looking at the new things you want to buy or like whatever website, I don't know, people are buying stuff from. Like you don't think about, oh, in 10 years this is gonna become an issue or anything like that.
Totally. And to be honest, when I was 21, I got myself into a ton of debt and I am still paying for it. I'm 33. I'm married. I've got kids. We organize our money well now, but we are still paying for it. We're still working our way out of it because of like pretty bad errors I made when I was younger. But it's so easy to do because you're just like, well, I can get this credit card and then I can get this credit card and I can get this credit card. And you can just keep getting credit cards. They're going to give it to you. Banks make money off of you spending on credit cards. They love it. They want you to stay in debt forever. And then all of a sudden you're, 25 or 26 and you've got thousands of dollars of debt and now you have to figure out how to get out of it. And it first starts with like, how to avoid it? Well, figuring out how to not overspend.
Okay, so here's a random question.
Okay.
What do you do when you have a lot of debt or maybe a person that you're dating has a lot of debt and you want to get married? Does that debt become one? That's something I've always thought about, but I'm not dating anyone, so it's not really like something I'm thinking too much about. But I'm like, the debt I have, does that become someone else's responsibility? And does the debt they have, will that one day become my responsibility?
Well, not technically, but when you get married, you're merging kind of your lives. And so like my problems that I had when I was 21 with money spending is now become a family problem because we have to figure out how to get out of this, or we had to figure out how to get out of our debt, right? And so we're both working, or I'm working while my wife was taking care of the kids, and here we are trying to organize our money and start getting ahead and looking to what we're going to do in the future, kind of wanting to reach goals, but we still have to take into consideration the fact that we have to pay off this debt and pay the interest on that debt and deal with that. And so it ultimately gets brought together. And so it is something that, whether you want it or not, is a part of your plate as a partner if the other person has a whole bunch of debt.
Do you have any advice on how to do that well? Like if you are entering a relationship or getting married and the person has a lot of debt, is there a right way and a wrong way to handle that? Maybe that's a bit too big right now.
No, that's
you with that one.
It's a really good question. There's always a better way to handle it. The best way, I would certainly say that one thing that you'd really hope for, or at least try to get to a point before you even get married, is to a position where that debt isn't going to become an increasing problem once you're married. Because if it's not a problem anymore, in regards to you're not getting more and more debt. You're not borrowing more and more. At least then you can start figuring out how to work through it together. And then it just becomes efficient financial planning, which is what's the most effective way that we can pay this off in a reasonable time so we can still live today well and give today and save for today. So it's a big question for sure, but ultimately it's you want the debt issue to not be there when you get married, because then it just becomes a bigger problem. And money is never it's never about the money, right? It's about money is just a tool that helps us accomplish our goals, helps us accomplish our values. And so money just brings about other problems. And so resentment could come into the marriage if one person is overspending and the other is trying to get the budget intact, or in a position where you guys are going to get ahead and reach those goals and fulfill your God-given purposes or values, or whatever you feel called to, right? And so if one person is hindering that, often that can cause resentment. If there's disagreement in how to spend your money, like that's a communication issue. And so money isn't necessarily the issue. It just shows other challenges that are in the relationship that you have to deal with. And so best thing to do is to talk about money ahead of time, is to actually discuss like how do we want to work with money? How did we grow up learning about money? Because a lot of it is we follow our parents and we see how they do things, and some of it's good and some of it's bad, and the other person has it's probably their families did some things good and some things not so well as well, but you're coming in with different views of how to organize your money. And so that's something that definitely needs to be talked out. And how do we do this well together? What are our values as a couple going forward? Because then you can actually address and direct your money towards those things, which helps you organize it. So it's just trying to get on the same page before you get started, right?
So you talked about how like money causes resentment and all these things, and scripture talks about how, or it can cause it's not just like a flat out thing. Scripture talks about how tied our hearts are to money, and how and I have it here, I think Matthew 26, it talks about how our heart is where our treasure is. And so how do you protect our hearts in like this case when it comes to money? How do we make sure that our hearts are in a healthy place while our money is also in a healthy place?
Right. So that verse, what is it, Matthew 6:21 or something like that? Where your heart is, there your treasure will also be.
Right.
Something. Yeah.
Paraphrase.
Yeah. I think that, again, it's not about money. It's always about your heart, right? You got to check your heart, because money isn't the problem. Money is just the great revealer of what your heart actually values, what you actually value, right? A whole bunch of people have said this, so I'm not, but it's like, you don't have to tell me what you value. Show me your bank statements and I can tell you what you value. The one thing you can't fake is how you spend your money. You can, and what that reveals about kind of, no, I don't always want to call it a heart issue, because when I look back to when I was 21, my bank statement would suggest that I valued clothing and looking good and eating out and being with friends and all those things that were personal gain and personal affirmation and making me feel good. My heart and my head wanted something different. I just didn't know how to get there, and and I was allowing the pressures of what's around me to help me or to aid me in going into debt and poor spending. So I just think, but I think money is a great revealer of where our hearts are actually at. And so it's just checking your heart. What is it that you actually value? What is God calling you to? What do you feel? I mean, it's God's money after all, right? And so do we view it as our own, or do we view it as his? Are we using it for our purposes, or are we using it for his purposes? And those things, just questioning yourself is like kind of the first place to start, I think, is like, what is my actual treasure, and what is my money showing about how my heart feels towards those things?
That is such a good challenge. Like I'm thinking right now, I'm going through like my bank statement of like, whoa, what have I been buying lately? Like how is that showing what I value? And is that actually aligning with like what my heart is? And like there's definitely some things on there that aren't my heart, yet they are on there. So how do we start to like even just shift that? Or how do we, here's another question, I guess. As young adults, as young people, a lot of us don't make a ton of money. We're in beginner jobs, or maybe only working part-time while in school, or not working at all while in school. How do
That's a tricky spot.
That's a tricky spot.
It's a really tricky
How do we foster these lives of generosity and of actually like aligning our finances with our heart and the heart of God while we're in this place of like, we don't make that much?
It's hard to do when you don't have any money.
Yeah.
Right?
Can't really give away, I guess, what you don't have.
You can't give away what you don't have. My advice is just like figure out where your heart is, what your values are. And this is actually how we start with anybody. It doesn't matter how much, how little you have. It's what are you doing with what you do have? That's the big question. And it always starts for me even when I'm working with clients or just talking to people about it. It's where are your values? What are your goals, your God-given goals that you're working towards? And then you check your spending. Does this align with it? And if it doesn't, how can I slowly start? Because I liken it to my running. I run with my kids a lot, and then I'm going slow, and then I get to go run by myself, and I just take off because I'm excited, and I think, oh well, when I'm running by myself, I can just give her, and and then I'm halfway through my run, and I'm all of a sudden tired, and I just kind of give up sometimes because I haven't actually prepared well for, or I wasn't well prepared for that run because I'm normally used to running slow with my kids, right? And so you have to start small. Don't take big leaps like, oh, I want to give 10% right away, or I want to save 10% right away. If you haven't been saving or giving anything, and that's your heart, but you haven't been doing it, then going from spending your entire paycheck or all the money that you have on yourself or your essential items that you need, like your rent and your groceries, and then all of a sudden taking away 20% of that so that you're giving and you're saving, like you're gonna end up giving up. You're like, it's gonna feel like such a sacrifice. And so just start small. So if your money isn't aligning with your values, well, okay, I want to give more. Well, give 1 or 2%. Maybe it's $5, but you've at least started like, okay, every paycheck, it's just going to automatically come off. I'm going to give $5 or $10 or whatever it is. Start small. When you don't feel it anymore, increase it. Because it just takes time to change habits, right?
Right, yeah.
And so it's just a matter of aligning your spending with your values slowly so that it can be done long term.
So if a young adult is listening right now and they're like, my finances are a mess, or like I never learned how to like budget well or anything, like what is a good starting point? Like are there resources out there? Like where do you even begin with this?
Yeah, so good starting point, don't spend more than you make. Spend less than you
Good
earn.
advice.
Spend less than you earn. That's your first step. If you're spending more than you earn, you're not going to be able to build a healthy finances. It's just not going to happen. So spend less than you make. As far as resources, there's all sorts of stuff online just on basic budgeting, and that's where you really do need to start. I think lots of people they make money and they like the idea of, well, I should just put money into an investment and let that grow, but really it's the main responsibility that we have is to organize our money well. It takes a little bit of discipline, and that's why people don't like doing it. They like just taking I got a group plan through work. I'll take it. I'll take that investment. I'll put it into high risk. I'll get it matched, and like I'll just leave it. The best thing is to actually just figure out how to organize your money in a way where you're spending less than you make, and you're kind of preparing at least a little bit for the future. Because we just went through a financial crisis.
Yeah.
But financial crises happen all the time in people's lives, whether it's they get sick or they can't work. Family, something happens with their family, and again, they're not working. Whatever the case, like life is uncertain. We can
Right.
hit financial crises at any time.
Yeah.
And so you need to, preparing for that is important. And
Is there
so-
like a rule of thumb for preparing, or like how do you prepare? Is that just like have a savings account like for emergencies, or what are
I
we
mean,
even
that's
supposed to do
that's a
that?
good start, but yeah, like, I mean, I think of 5 things that people can do easily, or maybe not easily. It's not easy. It's simple though. Five steps to at least have some sort of organized finances. The first is, as I said, spend less than you make. Second is to avoid debt. If you spend less than you make, you're not going to get into debt. But even so, don't save and then go into debt at the same time. Build margin. So that's like your emergency savings, I guess, or
Okay.
anything. Just build margin so that you are prepared for any emergency or an opportunity that comes, because when you have money, you also have the ability to take advantage of opportunities,
Right.
whether that's giving opportunities to support someone you care about, or business opportunities, or whatever it may be. It's and then try giving. I think it's really good. First of all, I think we're called to do it, and secondly, it literally gives us the same response in our body as eating chocolate, having candy, having sex. Our body responds the same way to giving intentionally as those types of things.
Everyone's like, great, I'm gonna try that
Yeah.
now.
So there's positive things for us also
Yeah.
that come from giving. So giving is really, really great. And then think long term. And if you can start thinking, okay, what do I want to be doing 5 years from now, or do I have goals 5 years, 10 years? It helps you make wiser decisions now if you have those things in the forefront,
You know
because
what
you
you're
need to
working
actually
towards.
prepare for them, right?
Yeah.
And I guess finally, just watch I call them stealth purchases. It's like those things under $20 that, like driving home from a late night at work, or evening class, stop off in the McDonald's parking lot, or the coffee in the morning at Starbucks, or wherever it may be. If you actually pay attention to those and like track them, they're probably through the roof on
They build up so fast.
they build up so fast,
Yeah.
but they're so small
bad.
that you don't notice them coming
Right,
on.
you're like,
So
"Ah, it's $5,
You don't think
it's
they're
$2."
impacting your
Yeah.
relationship. I mean, your finances.
Yeah.
Exactly, because it's so small. And then you add them up and you're like, oh man, I just spent $600 on McDonald's and Starbucks and glass of wine with friends, or whatever
Yeah.
it is. So
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So if you were to have like one thing to challenge or encourage our young adults with, what would you say?
oh. I think the biggest thing is just like take your income somewhat seriously. That's honestly it. It's so easy to
So
just
simple,
we
yet
have
so profound.
yeah we have income and then we get money and we just spend it. But like that's a gift from God, and it's our responsibility to steward it well. And are we stewarding it well? And it doesn't mean you have to necessarily be giving a ton or saving a ton right at this moment, because God's also given you passions and values and your own personal goals that money is there to be funded with. But take it seriously. Like look at it and be, how can I use this really, really well to live a life that I feel I'm proud of, and that will help me reach those God-given goals and stuff. So
Oh, that's so good. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining us to talk about this. I know we were saying before that's like people don't like talking about money, but it's such an important conversation to have, because if we don't talk about it, that's where we get to 5-10
Yeah.
years down the road and we're like, where did all my money go?
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being a part of this.
you bet. Yeah, it was a pleasure. It was definitely a pleasure. If I understand the whole challenge with not having support and accountability, because that's a big thing when it comes to trying to organize your money.
Yeah.
So
And other young adults are not very good at keeping young adults accountable.
no, because you guys are all dealing with
Yeah.
the same stuff. You're all dealing with the same
Yeah.
stuff, and the same pressures. And I'm still dealing with all of that. I still want to go out and eat out all the time.
Yeah.
And I really wish I could change my wardrobe, like I wish I could spend more money on clothes too. I get that. But so like, give me a shout. I'm happy to help walk people through that as well.
Awesome.
Because
And
sometimes
how do we contact you?
Not Brendan Peters, Brendan at freshgroundfinancial.ca.
Great.
Or
we'll get that posted too.
I could throw my phone number out there.
We'll start with the email.
Yeah, let's do
You're
that.
going to just like be bombarded with
Yeah,
text.
no, it doesn't
Email is
matter to
good.
me. Yeah, I'm good with
Awesome.
it.
We'll
Yeah.
make sure that all of our young adults get that. So thank you so much.
You bet.
I really love what Brendan said about taking our finances seriously. There's a Chinese proverb that says, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is today. And I think that's the same with our finances. It's like, yeah, we might be in debt, we might have crazy student loans, we might have no idea what we're doing with our finances, and we should have started when we were so much younger. But the next best time to start is just right now. And so here's some resources that you can look into that are completely free that might just help you along on your journey. One of them is a podcast. It's the Ramsey Network. Dave Ramsey is this incredible financial advisor. He's a Christian, and he takes people through how to get from being in a ton of debt to just being completely free of debt and having financial peace. And so you can look up his podcast on the Ramsey Network. The second thing is an app. There is this app called Mint. Oh my goodness, I love this app so much. I'm not even getting any money for saying how much I love this app, but I think it's so great. It connects right to your bank account. You can set how much money you want to spend in each category of your life, and then it keeps you accountable. It's just a really great tool you can have right on your phone, and it will send you notifications of, you spent way too much money on clothes this week. Cut back a little bit. And so that's just a really great tool. And then of course you can connect with Brendan at freshgroundfinancial.ca, or find him on Instagram, Brendan Peters Financial, and he would just love to connect with you and help you out. Guys, let's take this seriously. Let's take what God has given us, all the resources that he's given us. Let's take it seriously. Let's be generous. Let's be a generation that just becomes really smart and healthy with our money.